Our story begins with Junichi Ozawa alerting Akane Satsui, Yukio Kondo, and Ryo Nikaido, the other members of the Handa force, that their leader, Handa Sishu, who they adore, besides Yukio, has gotten an anime. After theorizing what the anime is going to be though, they find out the first episode's been aired already. So Ozawa angrily calls the development studio, only to be told to buy the DVD and be hanged up on. But at this, they decide to make their own anime about Handa, aside Yukio, who leaves. Meanwhile, the rest of the force work on the anime, and a few days later, they screen their piece. They're all excited besides Yukio, who's more concerned than anything, and we see that it's a poorly made cartoon which Yukio mocks. They'd all get angry at him for this, but stop as they get a delivery from the anime studio, where they get a disc of the first episode, which they immediately play as the credits begin. Handa Sishu is a second-year high schooler, fanatic of calligraphy, who attends High. But his issue is that he thinks everyone hates him, but he's actually the most popular guy in school, which he doesn't realize at all, regardless of anything, even secluding himself from everyone in his Handa wall. Opening his locker, he finds a letter, which he thinks is of misfortune. In class, distraught at it, he wonders if it's another kind of letter, like a challenge, so he throws it away. But at this, he gets called out by his classmate, Juri, saying that her friend Maiko spent all night writing that while she cries to her. Thinking that she won't punch him there, he asks what does she want from him. So embarrassed, she asks him to meet at the back of the gym after class, which he actually takes as a challenge. Worried of being mocked and considering running, he decides not to as he was publicly challenged, so he calms down and decides to write her a letter to talk at the back of school during lunch. But he's obliviously ignoring class, so the teacher demands him to write a problem's answer on the board, which he does with his brush, which everyone finds cool and makes his teacher even apologize, though Handa's still oblivious. As Maiko's not in his class, he decides to give Jiro the letter, which she mistakes as a love letter for her. She goes right outside, but she can't understand Handa's calligraphy and misunderstands it all for a love confession towards her, which makes her debate whether to stay loyal to Maiko or not. Later, they have lunch, but Jiro's getting pissed at her now and decides to not let her have Handa. Meanwhile, during lunch, Handa waits for Maiko, but she doesn't show up, so he ends up worrying, not knowing what to do. Though he ends up deciding to go and faces the girls as it's left in to be continued. After that, we see a Handa force left sad at their creation after seeing the real anime, so they decide to give their copy to Handa, which Yukio says they really shouldn't. In an after credits, we see Handa watching the force's anime shocked at it. Handa faces Jiro and Maiko, but as he's oblivious of what's happening, he tells them to make it quick, so Maiko tries to give him a letter. But Jiro stops her repeatedly and puts her on a chokehold. Shocked, Handa watches them fight as Jiro says Handa's letter moved her heart, though he doesn't know why, but telling him to run as they're not fit for him. Relieved, he decides to leave, but before that, he tells them that friends are hard to come by, so they'd better take care of each other. At this, Maiko breaks free and tries to hand him her letter, but he only says sloppy writing at it, which makes her fall to her knees as he finally leaves. Afterwards, Jiro and Maiko still lay there with the latter still crying, so at this, Jiro tells her to learn calligraphy together, so they can write love letters to Handa. They end up staying best friends, though love rivals, which makes Handa shiver out of nowhere. The next day, we're properly introduced to Junichi Aizawa, a genius who wants to be a class chairperson, who faces competition from Handa, though doesn't want it. It's just that his name was brought up while he was dozing off. After voting, they end up tying, so Handa tries to back away, only for Aizawa to demand a proper tiebreaker, so they're told to do rock, paper, scissors. Aizawa ends up excited, which makes Handa notice that he wants to be the chairperson, so he tells him he'll choose rock. But Aizawa thinks that he's being deceived, so he draws scissors, making Handa win. But Aizawa begs for a 3-match challenge instead, which he accepts. Aizawa wins the next round, but as Handa signals he'll use rock again, Aizawa ends up overthinking, so he chooses scissors again. Handa wins, leaving him hollow while Aizawa cries. But then Handa decides to step down, saying that he'll be busy with work. Though Aizawa doesn't accept this, thinking that he's doing it out of pity, though Handa says he always thought he'd be the one for the job, but that he didn't decline at first due to feeling sorry for him, leaving the classroom after that. At this, Aizawa ends up earning an utmost respect for Handa, even crying after seeing that Handa voted for him and decides that the most befitting person should be the chairperson. So the next day, Handa arrives and sees that he ended up chosen as the chairperson, while Aizawa is only the vice chairperson to his annoyance, though Aizawa tells him to leave the common duties to him. Afterwards, we're now properly introduced to Ryo Nikaido, a young model who planned on living high school easily surrounded by girls but was foiled as he ended in Handa's class. Talking to girls about him being in a magazine, they end up talking about Handa instead, who's in his Handa wall. Annoyed, he finds out they find Handa better than him, and they even mock him, so he decides to stalk Handa and find out the secret to his charm. Though as he sees girls approach him, Handa suddenly disappears, but Ryo ends up approached by them, while Handa reappears and walks away. So Rio tries to find him, and after a while he does, though his clothes are now dirty, as Handa's just staring at a cat. After 30 minutes, he finally leaves, so Rio grabs the cat to see if it holds Handa's secret, though he only stared at it because he sat uncomfortably, despite being allergic to cats. After that, he ends up at a place trying to buy something for his mom, but Rio recognizes that place as where he was scouted by his agency. So he is worried that the same will happen to Handa. He then runs into the guide who scouted him, who has noticed Handa, but Rio tries to stop him, to no avail as he hits him away. He tries to have Handa model with a jacket, but Rio tries to stop him again. Handa, thinking they're crazy, grabs the jacket and puts it around Rio, saying that he needs it the most and to reach out to those who need it, and leaves. Rio ends up touched by this and realizes why Handa is loved, earning utmost respect for him, though Handa only thought he was a hobo. The next day, he ended up fired by his agency, but it helped him mature, as he now seeks to be a man of purity like Handa, who at the same time is cursing at a lady who cut in line at the bus stop. Ozawa tries to have Handa, who's still angry at him, deliver a memo from him to Satsuya Kane, the truant student of their class. He became a shut-in a year ago after being bullied due to his feminine appearance. At his place, he tries to drop the package, but is met by a beef guy who threatens him, claiming to be Satsuya Kan. Handa is left shocked, but as Satsui thinks he's there to make him go back to school, he tries to intimidate him with his bat, but he doesn't flinch, which scares him, though it was because it was too sudden for him to react. Satsui then decides to tell his story. 1 year ago, he was bullied due to his looks, so he became a shut-in. But after seeing a commercial, he beefed up like crazy and beat up the punks in his zone, saying that since he's now the greatest, he doesn't need to go to school. But Handa only wants to hand him the package to leave, but Satsui takes this as a threat, becoming afraid of Handa, thinking that he's been in countless fights. But then many punks arrive to beat Satsui up for what he did. Handa meanwhile hands him his package, which he mistakes as him going to fight alongside him, only for him to leave. The punks try to stop him, but they notice he's Handa Sishu, and after saying multiple rumors of him, like how he killed a bear, they run away in fear. Later, Satsui opens the package but cries as he sees a plea for him to go back to school, thinking that it's from Handa. So the next day he goes back, though everyone's shocked at his new look. He decides to be Handa's bodyguard from afar, though Handa only ends up scared at how he looks at him. We're then properly introduced to Kondo Yukio, an average student who doesn't want to stand out, who ends up partnered with Handa and his group in cooking class. They decide to cook a special meal for Handa, but Yukio notices that he looks lonely, so he tries to have them cook with him, only for Handa to act tough saying that he doesn't care, but they find this fine as he has to maintain his pride, which shocks Yukio. As they make the meal, Yukio notices Handa has decided to make his own pudding, using the wrong ingredients, but the group then begins to fight as Satsui used too much oil, though then flame bursts from the pan, as Handa tried to pour it out with water, as everyone runs away, but the group tries to protect Handa as Yukio uses the fire extinguisher on them. They then believe Handa did it, so they would stop fighting, which leaves Yukio dumbfounded. As the meal is ruined, they decide to eat Handa's pudding, which they think he made for them. Though they first spit it out, they force themselves and Yukio to eat it, as Handa made it. Meanwhile, rumors spread of Handa's amazing prowess at flambe, while he drops the pudding he bought. We then cut to another day where Handa tries to approach his only friend Kalafuji, but can't, thinking that if he does, he'll also become a loner. In class, a girl's eraser accidentally falls next to Handa. In fear of being mocked if he gives it back, he throws a new one at her so she won't mock him. But this makes her fall in love with him. He then tries to use the old eraser, only to find out it had lead planted in it. After class, he's supposed to clean, but the girls tell him it's fine if he leaves, which he takes as them kicking him out. He then runs into Kalafuji and goes shop, but as classmates approach Kalafuji, Handa decides to hide, though ends up stuck. On the way back, they run into other girls again, so Handa hides again. Now at a coffee shop, he still hides as another girl approaches Kalafuji, though she asks for Handa, saying that she heard he's been selling his verses in the park yesterday, though Handa only takes this as a malicious rumor. After she leaves, Kalafuji tells Handa it's fine if he doesn't hide, but this only makes Handa think that he'll act like this until they graduate to protect him. But then we see that Kalafuji is the reason Handa behaves like this, as when they were young, the most popular girl in their class handed him a love letter for Handa, but shocked at being used as a third party, he only told Handa that she was telling everyone he was a narcissistic brush face, which made Handa shut his heart to everyone since then, despite Kalafuji trying to say that he was just kidding right after, though was plainly ignored. Though he says one day he'll correct this, but not now, as he's having fun. Handa has a stalker, a copycat who desires to be like him. In class, we see how a girl talks with her friends about how she bought a poem from Handa in a park. Hito hears this, knowing that he hasn't done that. The group who hang with Yukio, though he doesn't know why, wondering about this, decide to find out the truth and drag Yukio with them. At the park, they notice Handa selling poems, but it's not him, rather an imposter with ugly teeth, who Satsui punches on sight. though he still tries to behave like Handa, so Nikaido slaps him. After that, the imposter claims to not be doing this for money, but rather because he was born to be the true Handa. But Aizawa tries to cut his hair at this, so he reveals that his name is actually Kei Hanada, and has been Heida's fan since he saw him at the entrance ceremony, but that he became so attached to him that he began to think he was the real Handa. But then girls begin to approach and surround him, as they then lift him up the air, but he can't take this anymore, so he takes off his mask, deciding he can't be Handa, and falls to the ground as the girls notice he's a phony and leave. The group decides to take Hanada to apologize to Handa, as he's on class duty, but they only find his writing on top of one of Hanada's poems, which says, if you're going to copy someone, be better at it, which makes Hanada cry. After a while, Hanada's gotten braces now, though only because he interpreted Handa's words as him having to do better at mimicking Handa. We then cut to another day. Handa gets followed by two girls, but they see him giving food to a girl. They photograph this, which starts a rumor of him having a girlfriend. The girls at the school felt betrayed at this and began to bash Handa, though it didn't affect his daily life at all. The group wonders about this, but Handa then arrives to the classroom and sees that someone's written "die" on his desk, though he shrugs it off. After class, the group examines the kanji, but Aizawa says it could also mean "I'll die." But then they hear a scream as someone says a girl in their class is about to jump, so they rush there, while Handa, oblivious to all of this, decides to replace his desk. The girl that will jump is Miyoko Kinjo, the girl Handa gave an eraser to the other day, who yells out Handa's name, though he's oblivious again, and begins to sing about how after that, she could only think on him, so she couldn't focus on studying and her grades went down, ruining her life. She then claims that Handa must belong to everyone, and that he's torturing and toying with them for being the someone else. But as she's about to jump, she notices Handa, dropping his desk in the room next to her, thinking that it's a message from Handa. But oblivious, he's just examining the desks. But as she thinks she won't change her mind, Handa says, "You are irreplaceable and special," and apologizes for making his desk suffer, which Miyoko hears and thinks it's for her. So she decides not to jump and forgives Handa. Afterwards, she tries to clean his desk, but breaks down at the thought of Handa having a girlfriend and runs to a sink. But then, Handa's supposed girlfriend approaches her asking for the faculty room, as she finds out she's actually his mother. She then revealed this to the others, which stopped Handa's bashing. Afterwards, Handa's mom met with his teacher, Okayama Hideo, who revealed that Handa was a social, so they recommended talking to his classmates more. Forced, he decides to do so with Miyoko, though mistakes her craziness for hate. But then, Aizawa talks to him about student council work, but ignoring him, Handa only says good work, but Aizawa backs down nervous as Handa thinks he didn't react well, only for Aizawa to then cry of happiness. So he then notices Ryo and decides to cover his head with his shirt in an attempt to look funnier, though Ryo is left thinking he annoyed Handa with his noise. Satsui then arrives, who's being asked to fight bullies from Kuro High, but he's not interested. Handa decides to talk to him about the weather outside, so he stands up next to him. But Satsui, nervous of Handa, sees this as a sign that he must fight, so as Handa finally says the weather's nice today, Satsui claims it's the perfect day to strike, and Handa, nervous at this, then points to the window, which Satsui takes as him having to show his resolve by throwing everything away for battle, so he throws a chair out of the window. Handa ends up frustrated, but gets nervous as he sees everyone left already, though Yukio then comes, who knows that they were told to change classrooms. Handa follows him and decides to talk to him, but only comes up with "Japan's a nice place," which makes Yukio nervous, and in turn Handa, who thinks he messed up, though Yukio ends up saying that it is nice indeed, which makes Handa flourish in happiness and leaves victorious. At night, he told his mom what he did, but upon seeing her disinterest, he figured it wasn't that amazing after all. The vice principal calls out some students as their skirt is too short, but he's then reproached by Sawako Tenouji, the student council president, who every girl admires but who also has a strong dislike for men. But then she sees Handa with his group and worries that he might be forming a coalition against her, though they're just stalking him. Further worrying as other girls praise him like mandrills. Rikimaru, the student council vice president, who wears a girl's uniform, explains that Handa's clean, lacking a weak point, so Sawako decides she'll make one. During lunch break, she plans on sending 2 hot girls to seduce Handa. They find him behind the school, but as they're about to attack, he claims that he knows 2 stray cats are there, saying that he can't play with them and to take care of themselves. The girls, saddened, leave, though we see he was actually talking to 2 stray cats who he gives some vegetables to, though ends up with allergies. Back to Sawako, they explain their failure as they've fallen in love with Handa instead, which makes her scream in rage and demands Handa be taken to her. So they do so, tied alongside Aizawa. For causing disorder, she sentences Handa to wear a girl's uniform for a year. Handa's left confused, but Rikimaru, who apparently suffered the same fate, tries to convince him that it will be good for him, though this only makes him think he's crazy. Embarrassed of being mocked, he manages to run away, but they chase after him as Rikimaru tells him he'll want to wear cute undies after this. He ends up cornered, But then Rikumaru catches up to him and pushes him down the stairs against Sawako, while someone pulls down his skirt trying to stop him. Sawako, remembering how he hates males because some kids made fun of her, finds herself on top of Handa, unconscious, as they tell her it seemed like he tried to cushion her fall. This makes Sawako be conflicted as she's fallen in love with Handa, though stops as she sees Rikumaru wearing a thong next to her, so she beats him up. They then leave as Aizawa finds Handa conscious now but who only remembers Sawako holding on to him for dear life, but nothing else, as he's lost his memory. Handa behaves more extrovertedly and confident now, which scares Tsutsui and Ryo. Aizawa explains what happened, and they all worry for him, even the fake Handa, who runs away as he sees him use glittery objects. Though Handa then talks to them, and they find out he's aware of his memory loss, though he remembered the most important thing. He's popular, as he leaves to find girls. The group ends up disheartened at this, with Tsutsui crying. But Aizawa decides to at last assemble the Handa force and force Handa to go back to normal. Meanwhile, Yukito finds Handa spookingly flirting with a girl, though he thinks he's just another Handa imposter. The same happens later with other girls, as he tries to kiss them all, though not with Miyoko. Yukio then explained what happened, as Aizawa reads that he might recover his memory if they apply the same level of shock from a manga, so he decides to hit him with a hammer, as they see Handa being chased by Miyoko. Handa manages to escape, but ends up annoyed at that. Despite his popularity, he feels lonely, though he ends up finding the feeling nice, which makes him get a massive headache. But then, Tsutsui strikes from behind with a hammer, though wanting to die for hurting Handa. Handa runs away, but runs into Aizawa and Ryo, who chase after him with hammers as well. Though he then stops by the stairs due to his headache, and due to the Handa force's threats, he ends up thinking that everyone hates him repeatedly, which makes him, at last, recover his memory. Though they strike anyways, and he ends up falling down the stairs. But as he stands up, they see his aura, as he confirms everyone hates him, and realize in fear he's back. The next day, Handa tries to interact with the new Handa, only to be intimidated by his stare, to the Handa force's relief. Handa's more anxious than ever now after the Handa force threatened him to restore his memory, so Kawafuji decides to do something about it, but without telling him the truth, by taking him to an arcade. Though he didn't expect he'd come disguised as a girl, and Handa didn't expect Kawafuji would bring his friend Hasegawa, so he fakes being named Hanzawa. Now inside, Hasegawa tries to win 3 keychains, so they have to help him by playing darts, basketball, and bowling, which Handa has never played. During bowling, Handa gets his hand stuck in a kid's bowling ball and then slips while trying to throw a normal one, while Kawafuji aces his 3 shots and wins 1 keychain. Next is darts, so Handa studies a book about how to play darts. Kawafuji misses his 3 shots, so Handa, focusing hard, tries and manages to hit the middle perfectly thrice in a row, though ends up hurting his arm because of it. Finally, basketball. Handa claims to have never played it, but Hasegawa regardless finds him fun, which Handa gets happy at, wondering if they'll become friends. Hasegawa then wins the game as he finally gets all keychains. After that, Kawafuji goes buy juice, so he leaves Handa and Hasegawa alone. He tries talking to Hanzawa, but Handa gets nervous, though ends up happy as Hasegawa tells him he'll loan him his basketball manga and wonders if he'll accept him as Handa. But then Hasegawa is pushed to the ground and his keychains fall as his basketball club seniors bully him by taking his keychains. Handa gets nervous, but decides to help him by changing back into his Handa outfit, though it's just so they can punch him, but instead, they become afraid and give back the keychains and leave. Kawafuji then arrives and sees Handa back to normal, though he tells Hasegawa not to think he knows him just because of what happened here and leaves. Though Hasegawa then fanboys to Kawafuji about seeing Handa himself. The next day, Handa drops his papers, but Hasegawa helps him as he realizes he's Handa himself. Handa gets happy, but Hasegawa remembers what he told him yesterday, so he runs away while calling himself stupid, as Handa ends up sad, and Kawafuji laughs from a corner. Though Hasegawa later loaned his manga to Hanzawa, which eased him a bit. We then cut to another story. Kotaro Higashino, the fastest sprinter in school, who earned himself the nickname of Dash. He could be in a higher league and better school, but chooses not to because of Handa, because he's the only one who has beat him. Years ago, they raced, but he had a stomachache, so in his imagination, Handa bullied him while racing, so he's vowed revenge since then. But the issue is he's scared shitless of him. Though Handa notices he's obsessed with Handa as well, but Dash punches him at this. Later, he explains the issue, so Handa decides to help him in test runs, but once he puts his face mask on, Dash cries in fear and runs like hell, though getting a new best time in the process. Hanada comes up with making a situation where he has to race Handa instead, so Dash decides to light a flare and pretend a fire started. But Handa only crouches away as Dash ends up scolded by the principal. Later at noon, his teacher tells him to forget about Handa, as he'll end up only ruining his talent. He realizes all he's done for 2 years is stalk Handa, so he decides to get back on track, only for Handa to pass by him running fast, so he chases after him again. Though Handa then suddenly stops and jumps away because he was actually being chased by a dog who now chases, pins down, and humps Dash, who ends up believing that Handa was using him as bait. Later, Kamafuji talks to Handa about Dash, though Handa has no idea who that is at all. We then cut to another story. Yumi is a student practicing fortune-telling the palmistry who wants to read Handa's palm to test her abilities, so he reaches out to the Handa force. Meanwhile, Handa reads his weekly fortune in a board where he's told something unexpected will shock him, but that he can bring luck to his side by helping others. Though he then hears Tsugumi wanting to read his palm, so he decides to help her, to everyone's shock. Tsugumi goes ahead but gets scared as his palm is too normal and lacking lines as the Handa force gets afraid due to her writing on it. She realizes his hand reads that he has extreme paranoia, but not wanting to say something disappointing, she chooses to reveal that Handa bears a very harsh fate of eternal solitude, or like against all the odds, which they take as a fighter's fate, though Handa, distraught, ends up mad at them taking it well. She then reads his future and finds out that despite him lacking a marriage line, he'll end up with more than 7 children, saying that Handa won't live a decent life, to his shock. Later, she ends up sad as she misread Handa's hand, but ends up thinking that Handa set himself up to teach her, which he didn't. The students get their midterm tests results. Ryo and Satsui have to take the supplementary exam as they ranked awfully, so Satsui lends the force his place to study, which they decide to make the Handa force's headquarters. As Aizawa ranked first, he'll be teaching them, though they then wonder which rank Handa got, as he supposedly should earn first, so Aizawa theorizes he purposely failed to get first place to not stand out, which makes them fanboy over him, which frustrates Yukio, as he only wants to study. So they decide to study for Handa, except Yukio, as later, Aizawa shows them preparation tests, which use Handa as an example for every question. The next day, they await the exam as Dash and Hanada arrive as well, since they also have to retake the exam, though in Hanada's case, it's because he put Handa's name as his name in the exam. Though they then get into a fight as they want to sit on Handa's desk, but then Handa himself arrives to everyone's shock. They all wonder if it's because he forgot to put in his name, though quickly shrug that off, as we see the reason is because despite having gotten a good rank, he forgot to put his name in. Though despite being told his grade wouldn't be affected by it, Okayama still made him attend as punishment so he won't forget again. Later, Handa begins scratching his pen against the exam, which they all find rare, but they all mimic him regardless, filling up the exam as they all fight as one with Handa. The exam then ends, and the next day, Satsui and Ryo find they barely made it and attribute it to Handa helping them, saying that he didn't take the first place so he could help them during the supplementary exam. Though we see that Handa was fooling around with it, scoring in 0 and forgot to put his name in again. And that Dash and Hanada failed at the exam as well, with Hanada using Handa's name again. We then cut to another story. Kasumi Hirayama, a shy girl, works at the school's library, though almost no one goes there now, besides Handa, who she has a crush on as per. She's trying to have Handa pick up a book in his Handa corner, where in it, the coolest kid in school falls in love with a dull librarian. She tricks him by changing a book's cover, expecting him to read it and fall in love with her. He leaves with the book, but then the Handa force enters looking for Handa, but as Satsui drops some books, Hirayama gets mad, though Ryo notices all the books that are specifically for Handa, which makes her crazily yell that she's no ordinary fan as she fantasizes with marrying him. But that Ryo and Satsui suggest fashion magazines and martial arts books, as Handa's a fashion model and a fighter, only as they then choose to renovate the library altogether to fit Handa's tastes. Hirayama ends up agreeing as they are closer to him, which they aren't, and after getting many donated books, thanks to saying they were for Handa, they managed to bring the library back to life. This in turn makes a lot of people go there, making her very busy. But as Handa sees there's a crowd, he decides to go back later to return a book. At closing time, Handa finally arrives to return the book. He talks to her, but as it's her first time doing so, she's very nervous and wonders if he'll pat her head, though he only tells her the book has the wrong cover. Though she asks if he read it, which he says he did, a little, saying that he was enthralled with how earnest the librarian was in her work. This makes her think that Handa's always noticed her, so she tells him she won't order more books on calligraphy because she wants more variety of books, telling him he doesn't have to come back anymore because she wants to become a full-fledged woman for him. But this just leaves Handa depressed, as he later explains what happened to Kawafuji, who was the one who actually read the book, as Handa says he said what Kawafuji told him about it to Hirayama. Okayama, who worries about Handa's popularity, wants to have his class perform frog dissections to show them the reality of things, but is denied after complaints from parents. Angry at this, he decides to get Handa's help to sway the students. But when he asks Handa, he's only met with an ugly look as he doesn't want to hurt frogs. Though Aizawa decides to support him and then tries to drag Handa in with them, but he doesn't want to, but as he's too socially awkward, he's unable to say no. Later, Aizawa tries to convince the class, saying that they'd make pressed flowers instead, while Handa's still mad and not saying no. But Yukio, who's against the dissection, notices this, so he says they'd listen to Handa. But nervous, he thinks everyone's mocking him, so he ends up saying he has a taste for the bizarre, to Yukio's shock. After that, the guys end up convinced that the issue's now the girls, who'd rather do the pressing flowers. So he tries to have Handa sway them, but he tells them they don't want to. But they take this as Handa being so intent in dissecting they decide to go through with it, to his dismay. They end up getting the necessary approvals as Aizawa cheers on Handa power, while Handa thinks this class sucks. The next day, it's dissection time. Okayama decides to give Handa his largest frog, but as he sees others fool around with theirs, he thinks that humans are cruel, while Okayama, happy, tries to hug Handa. But at the same time, his frog tries to escape, so he tosses it away, but it hits Satsui, and then chaos ensues as all the frogs break loose. Handa ends up laying semi-conscious next to a sink, but as he speaks, they think he's been possessed by a frog as he says humans are scary and that he wants to leave. Anguished, they decide to let the frogs go, releasing them in a river afterwards, while Yukio wonders if they fit the ecosystem. The students then notice flowers and play with them, as Okayama thinks to himself that he wanted to show them weakness and learn kidness through dissection, but that they achieved it without drawing blood thanks to Handa power, but decides not to let Handa get to his head as his teacher. Meanwhile, Handa almost gets killed by a frog in his sleep. We then cut to another story. It's Aizawa's turn to watch over Handa today, but Handa suddenly runs away, losing sight of him as Aizawa wonders if he's being stalked. At the Handa Force HQ, Aizawa tells the others this, noticing that Handa's been taking weird routes to get away from the stalker, while Yukio realizes they're the ones he's running away from, so they decide to hunt the stalker. The next day, the group splits in two as Yukio and Aizawa follow Handa. After hiding from him, though he notices them, they see Miyoko coming out of a bush, but Aizawa says she's fine as she only keeps an eye on problematic fans, having earned the nickname of Eraser for erasing them. Meanwhile, Satsui and Ryo witness as Miyoko trapped Hirayama, who wanted to approach Handa. But then Satsui notices someone looking at them, so they chase after him thinking it's the stalker. While that happens, Aizawa and Yukio follow Handa, who wonders why is he being so followed, but as he has to meet with Kawafuji, he decides to run for his life. But Aizawa takes this as the stalker must be close, but he has a plan as he has dash run after Handa, who he remotely tracks. Later, Satsui and Ryo follow the stalker, but they run into a dog, and then the gates behind them close as the stalker gets away and the dog attacks them. Meanwhile, Dash runs into Aizawa and Yukio, telling them he lost sight of Handa as he can't make sudden turns. Satsui and Ryo then arrive after having fought the dog as Eraser goes there as well with Hirayama, saying that even she has trouble catching the stalker. At this, they all decide to join forces and catch him. Later, Handa ends up losing them, but as he jumps up a wall and sees his destination, he runs into them all. They all end up shocked but pissed off. He decides to finally yell at them to get lost and not follow him anymore, leaving right after. But Aizawa takes this as he's talking to the stalker, so they decide to continue protecting Handa by following him every day from then on. Meanwhile, Handa arrives at the cafe and meets with Kawafuji, who says was playing with a dog earlier, as we find out he was the stalker. Yukio tries talking to his regular friends, but they avoid him out of fear, as he's associated with Handa now. Later, at class, he notices a supposed love letter on his desk, where a girl asks him to go behind the school after class. Dumbfounded, he theorizes it might be a letter of harassment, though Okayama, at the same time, asks what will he use his pressing flowers for, so it ends up sounding like he'll use them for harassment, scaring him off. He decides to show the letter to Satsui, who says that it's a letter of challenge indeed, recalling how he got one once time ago, but after going there, he got stripped of his clothes, and then they force their way to his ass as Yukio begs him to shut up. But Aizawa says the girl who signed the letter is an average girl like him, so it'd be a love letter naturally. So the Handa Force then encourages him, telling him to give her a postcard, which Satsui writes how you feel on it. But then, as some girls murmur, he realizes he's being treated coldly because others are envious of him being in the Handa Force, but sees the benefit as he might get a girlfriend. But after going behind the school, the girl only tells him he's an average Joe and to stop acting like he's part of the Handa Force, crushing him. But the Handa Force was watching, so they try to cheer him up, though Yukio says he's fine, only to then run away in tears. Later, he walks back home, but runs into Handa, who only recognizes him as the guy who bullied him in Kyoto. As he carries flowers for pressing, Yukio notices them, but Handa, embarrassed, says that they're for harassing instead. Yukio figures that Handa has gone through a lot due to what others imagine him to be, but that he's actually shy and kind. So he decides to give him the postcard he was planning on giving the girl and leaves and running into the Handa Force who were worried for him. But as Handa sees the postcard, the kanji is turned into a "you fool" instead, thinking Yukio harassed him. We then cut to another story. the Bishuvano Club at school, who make manga illustrations. With their members, Sakura Mio, Takoyaki, and Dr. Psycho, is met with that the student council has decided to shut them down as the school doesn't want to fund their hobbies since their manga isn't selling at all. Though Aizawa says that a manga about Handa would actually sell, but that he has to allow it first. But since they only draw girls, they kick him out in anger, but not before telling them they'll be picking up recyclable paper next week. Though later, they decide to make a manga about Handa, gender-bent. As they can't agree on how she should behave, they decide to make the manga individually, and the best one will be the one they will choose to sell. Sakurang decides to interview Handa by talking to him with a doll while hidden. Handa gets nervous at this, but then Sakurim tries to have him take her skirt off, but Handa simply covers her with a handkerchief, saying that even though she's a figure, girls shouldn't be saying things like that. Sakurim ends up shocked at this, realizing that he's been treating his wife like a prostitute and apologizes to the doll while now idolizing Handa. 1 week later, they present their mangas, but as Sakurim sees they're too perverted, he punches them as they're not respecting Handa's sanctity. They get mad, saying that their readers are looking for porn, but after they take a look at Sakurim's manga, they end up delighted and in tears and decide that this will be the one they sell. But they still need Handa's approval, so they go find him, leaving the manga there. But then Handa himself comes to pick up the recyclable paper. On the way, they find Aizawa, who tells them Handa went to collect recyclable paper, as Aizawa asks for theirs. So they go to the club, but they find the paper, alongside their manga, gone. So they rush trying to reobtain them, which Handa hears. But they're late as the truck left, though Handa rushes at it, realizing he's the one who threw their manga away, and manages to bring it back. Though as they look for their copies, a page goes flying towards Handa's face, where he sees a perverted female version of him. The student council president Sawako talks about the upcoming autumn cultural festival, though she's decided to name it Handa Festival. As we see, she changed her hairstyle because she got a hairpin from Handa's class, trying to excuse it with the kanji meanings, though Okayama still rejects the idea. Later, she's decided to name it the Sishu Festival instead, though Sishu is Handa's last name, as Aizawa mediates with his class about what they'll present to win the Best Class Award. Ryo proposes a maid cafe, as he wants to dress up a girl, while some girls propose to perform Romeo and Juliet. Handa, only thinking on meeting with Kawafuji, is surprised with that he has to choose, so he has to choose between those options in calligraphy class. Yukio notices he's troubled, so he tries to help, though Handa only sees him as the guy who hates him, by saying that Handa likes musicals because they're popular right now, but it just annoys him more, so they add it to the board. But as he thinks he'd be with Kawafuji right now at the cafe, he says that part out loud, making it sound like he wants to do the maid cafe, which shocks everyone, so he panics and runs away. At this, they think they bothered Handa too much, so they decide to choose by themselves. Meanwhile, Handa ponders on this, but then Sawako approaches him, asking him to write everything involving words for the festival, which he accepts to her surprise. After that, Handa decides to make the call, but he sees everyone left already, and that they've chosen to do a Romeo-Juliet cafe musical, leaving calligraphy out because not everyone is as good at it as him, which would burden him, per Aizawa, which only knows Handa. Later, Handa meets with Kawafuji, who tells him that they'll be doing a calligraphy performance to Handa's dismay. The next day, Handa notices some punks bullying someone, so Satsui, who's stalking him, wonders why Handa isn't beating the crap out of them, only for Handa to yell at him to go help, so Satsui goes and beats their crap. Later, they prepare for the festival at school, though Aizawa tells Handa he only has to sit as the chairperson, which he takes as him being distanced. At night, all the students left besides Handa, who fell asleep, but they wanted him to rest unbothered, though he found this as bullying. But then, some punks try to attack Handa, only for the Handa force to intervene and beat them up. Afterwards, Handa finishes his work for the festival. The next day, Handa's class and Hirayama, who Eraser won't let go despite being in another class, discuss about their roles for the play. Aizawa ended up using other Shakespearean characters as he needed more, but as Handa wants to know who he'll play, Aizawa only tells him to relax, which makes him worry, though he hears they'll make a wig for him, so he leaves afraid. Meanwhile, Handa tells the Forces class will do a makeup class, though he can only make people look like Handa. Handa, meanwhile, is sad as he thinks everyone's avoiding him, though cheers up at seeing his writing being used for the festival, so he decides to try to make friends, but changes his mind as he sees the Force again. Later, the Force notices Handa's sign, but they want to make it known he made it, so the next day, the festival begins, but Handa sees they put his full name in the sign to his shock. Everyone works hard at it, while Kawafuji and Hasegawa attend Handa's class event, where Satsui is Juliet and Ryo is Romeo, though they've taken quite some liberties with it as King Lear and Otello appear. But then, Elizabeth I appears, played by Handa, who wonders what the hell is he doing, while everyone claps. He's frustrated as he doesn't have lines, but notices Kawafuji, who wonders if he's at fault for this. But Handa, embarrassed, decides to leave, so he stands up and says, "I am going to sink the Spanish Armada," and leaves as everyone cheers at this, while being followed by everyone. Later, the same punks who tried to attack Handa arrive at the festival. The Bishuro Club sells their Handa manga as the punks buy some from them, who they recognize as delinquents from Kuro High. Meanwhile, the force rests from the play and explores the festival. But then third years who got beaten up warn them that Kuro High is there looking for Handa, though they reveal they got hurt by women after trying to peek at their panties. While that happens, Kuro High mistakes Hanada for Handa, but then many Handa copycats show up, confusing them, but escape as one is Hanada, asking for Handa's location. Hanada won't betray Handa, but Dash then shows up telling Hanada to go see Handa in Class 7. So the delinquents go there while Hanada calls him stupid. On the way, the palm reader tells them something bad will happen to them and that they will die, which scares them as they run away, while Eraser and Hirayama notice them, so they decide to go after them. Meanwhile, the force reunites as they couldn't find the delinquents nor Handa, as Hanada arrives with Dash, telling them that Kuro High knows where Handa is. At that moment, the Bishuro Club sells more manga to Ichimiya's group as they've also arrived. Ichimiya notices the festival is lively, as it's focused on Handa, and they go find him in his play. There, Handa waits for the performances to begin, though feeling empty because he thinks everyone's treating him badly. But he thinks it's because he's only sitting there, so he decides to try saying a line, going out and hears a bang as his signal. But then he hears the Kuro High delinquents arrive, who he confuses for customers. While their leader Rag talks about how High rules this area due to Handa, Handa only focuses on saying his line. Ishimiya's group then arrives as well, who tells them to leave, but not wanting to fight, only for Tomohiro to punch someone regardless, so they begin to fight, while Handa still practices, oblivious of what's happening outside. But then, Satsui storms in, breaking the door, which Handa takes as the signal, so he yells, "See Ace, you're fighting," as his door closes again, but ends up embarrassed, because he thinks he came out at the wrong time. But everyone ends up fighting at this, as the delinquents reveal they actually came here to submit to Handa, as since he's appeared, it gotten weak and lost members. Ishimiya admires Rei for this, though he lays on the floor bleeding, as Eraser hit him with a brick while no one was watching. Later, the festival's about to end as they wait to see who won the best class award. Handa ends up being again, as he hears the chairperson of the class that wins will have to wear a crown, or helmet, rather, which makes him nervous. First, the Bishuro Club is awarded for having sold 5,000 copies of the Handa manga, those only given a cardboard crown. And next, the Best Class Award is given to Handa's class to his dismay as he's called to the stage. Everyone cheers up his name, though he thinks he'll be shamed. But as he's about to receive the helmet, Kawafuji objects the award, saying that he also wants it. Sawako vehemently rejects that, while Handa ends up bothered as he took what Kawafuji wanted. But at this, Kawafuji tells him to hand him the helmet, saying that they've been friends since forever. Handa ends up in dismay at this, as everyone demands Kawafuji to piss off, and a brawl begins over the helmet, and they throw stuff at him, as Handa ends up closing himself in his Handa wall. Kawafuji tells him to hand the helmet already, but Handa refuses, as they'll hate him if they find out he's his friend, but Kawafuji tells him to see how things really are. His wall dissipates and he sees everyone cheering at him as Kawafuji finally reveals he's never been hated, but rather, he's popular. So then, Handa takes off the helmet and says it isn't his, nor Kawafuji's, but rather that the glory of the festival belongs to everyone. Aizawa at this says that Handa belongs to everyone as their friend as well, confronting Handa, as Sawako brings out a giant Handa inflatable, which she ordered as she expected Handa to win already. Though Handa questions Kawafuji, as he told him everyone hated him before, but Kawafuji tries to play fool at this. Aizawa then asks him to get on top of the inflatable Handa, as he's the star of the day, as everyone praises him, so he agrees only to see it burn up in flames and realize he would have died if he had been on it, though everyone admires it anyways. The next day, Kawafuji waits for Handa outside, but Handa's still nervous, so he's told to just be his usual self, but to get rid of his wall, as everyone who admires him approach him, as he smiles.